Hey, BecomingMeTV, Emily Cummins here. We're in a series right now called Questions Everyone is asking, but no one wants to answer. Today, we're going to dive into the question, what is self-care and how can I do that? Hey, grab your coffee and join me as my friend Ashley unpacks this question with us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley, and today I have the wonderful privilege of talking about self-care. So what is self-care and how do we actually do that in our lives? And I took some notes, so if you see me, my eyes kind of drifting over to the screen, that's just because I'm using them as a guide. But anyways, let's jump right in. So I think as Christians, when we hear the word self-care, we can sometimes have this tendency to immediately equate this term with selfishness. And I think rather than peeling back this misconception and actually digging deep into what Jesus has to say about the matter and what, the scriptures have laid out for us, I think we can, just as women, kind of disregard the meaning of self-care completely, just altogether. And that's what I've done from time to time in my own life, and so I totally get how easy it is to do that because it's just something that is not really talked about, and so I guess that's why we're talking about it now. But I think the fact is that as humans, we really need to incorporate self-care into our daily rhythms of life. And this is talking separately, we're not talking about the Sabbath necessarily. We're just talking about, Monday through Friday, how do we, tap into what's going on in here and what's going on in here, and how do we, realign ourselves with what God is trying to teach us, I guess. And all of that to say, I think self-care actually looks a lot like grace, and it looks a lot like rest, in my opinion. And for me, self-care, when I've reflected on this and said, okay, Ashley, how am I like taking care of myself? Again, setting aside the whole selfish misconception, which we'll peel back in just a minute. But I think tangibly it means no longer listening to the shoulds of my day. So no longer listening to, I should do this today, or I should do this, or I should get caught up with this, or I should really do this because I haven't done it yet. And some of those things are good, like working out or, doing something that's life-giving or paying the bills, like those things are good. But I think sometimes we get so caught up in the never-ending to-dos and the never-ending shoulds. And instead, we kind of get overwhelmed and we get exhausted really quickly. And we don't tune our ear into what the Spirit has to say. And we kind of have this inward focus now, right? And so I think when we get so caught up in the shoulds of our days, we miss out on the entire fact that Jesus invites us into a life where the pace is set by Him and not by our planner. And I think we really have to be extremely mindful, and we have to relearn, and we have to kind of tune our ear into what the Holy Spirit is trying to tell you throughout your day. And I think that's a huge part of self-care. It's so important too, as we talk about self-care, that we are rooted and established in the fact that self-care is not about building our own kingdom. Jesus came because He invites us into this amazing life that revolves around building His kingdom and not our own. And I think that, and I've experienced this too, of He will graciously lead us beside those still waters, as the Psalms describes. But we kind of have to slow down in order to fully experience that. And we hear this term, be still, right? We hear that in the Psalms, and in Hebrew, that word can literally translate and mean to let go of your life. And I think that that's so powerful, because self-care does, in my opinion, mean slowing down in a world where we're so overstimulated and so oversaturated with notifications, of things to keep up with, whatever that means, and not realizing when we actually need self-care and not knowing how to practically apply that to our lives can actually be really soul-crushing. I think that that's why we're talking about this, right? I think Jesus invites us into a life where we don't play by the same rules of the world. And so what that means is that self-care is not about being self-absorbed or preoccupied with ourselves. It's actually about creating this margin of space for you and for me and you to reconnect with the one who made us. Because we know that he's the only one that can put that life back into us at the end of the day when our feet are aching, our eyes are heavy, and our hearts are hopeless. Like we've all been there. And I think that there's so much freedom, though, now, like the practical aspects of, there's so much freedom in how we as human beings can carry out our practice of self-care. Everyone's wired so differently, and that's an amazing thing. In my life, self-care comes in the form of, I don't even know, Epsom salt baths. I love those. Pilates class, going to the Natural Foods Co-op and getting a few of like my favorite treats. It can be something like making myself a smoothie, or just even giving myself like a home pedicure with my favorite dollar store glitter nail polish. And I think in other seasons, it can look like having, a treat yourself moment and going out with your girlfriends and grabbing, a cup of coffee, or I don't even know, buying that house plant that you've always wanted, going on a hike, being outside. It can literally look so many different ways, and that's the great part, is you get to discover what makes your soul come alive. What makes you feel like my mental lungs just took a deep breath when I did this, And I think, again, not trying to turn it inward, I think we totally need self-care, and I think we're so weak, and that's why the gospel is so amazing, is because it's just, it gives us strength when we don't have any left, and it's always there. It's always accessible to us, and it's a piece that it doesn't make any logical sense, right? And we can always tap into that, and then we can actually call others into that life. And so when we do, actually practice self-care, I like it because it shows that there's this huge cavity in my heart that can't be filled with things. It can't be filled with, compliments from other people. The only thing that can be filled with is the Lord and spending time in his presence. And so that is kind of a way that, whatever makes you feel close to him. A lot of people, it's through nature. You go outside and you see God's fingerprints all over the place. And I think we're totally made to go outside, to take a deep breath, and to get filled up again. And yeah, other times I think self-care can actually mean serving others. And I think it's crazy how sometimes I first think that, and I'm like, not today, Lord. Loving my neighbor can just seem just out of reach when I'm so spent and at the end of my rope. Yet I've found that when I actually obey what God is asking of me, being a good Samaritan, even when my cup is super, super empty, it's actually incredibly life-giving. And so I think that self-care means cultivating a life of grace for yourself and in turn for others, because that's exactly what God did and continually does for us, right? I think it means self-care, I think means taking the Sabbath seriously. I didn't do this for a really long time, and I found myself time after time just being more than exhausted, if that makes sense. And now, because I'm actually believing the fact that Jesus, made the Sabbath for a reason, and that it is a really big deal to obey his commands and trust that he's got it all under control, right? The be still means to literally, the Hebrew translation means to let go of your life. And so I found that I wasn't taking a Sabbath because deep down, I didn't know if I, like, really, like, with everything I had, like, could let go of it all and take a day off. And now that I have been, incorporating that into my daily rhythm or my weekly rhythms of life, I am exhausted, right? I'm still a human being, but I'm happily exhausted. And that's because I know that when I take that self care, right? And again, we've talked about self care means, you know, taking some time for yourself through whatever that may be. But the key is that I think the main point that if you don't hear anything else today, whatever your self-care is, it has to, in my opinion, it has to point back to the Creator, right? It has to bring you closer to the Lord. It has to draw you into His presence. And I think, it's not just about like taking a bubble bath or like, making a smoothie or whatever. Like, I think whatever makes you feel alive and whatever kind of reminds you of the hope found in the gospel, I think that's self-care. All right. Thanks, guys.